Hello, I'm Bakhtiar Sanova and you are watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. The United States sanctions Russia's two largest oil companies and calls on Moscow to agree to immediate ceasefire. A ceasefire is still possible, says Zelensky, as EU leaders gather in Brussels with support for Kiev and pressure on Russia topping the agenda. And the United States warns that Israel's preliminary vote to annex parts of the West Bank could jeopardize the Gaza ceasefire deal. We start in Washington, where President Donald Trump has announced sweeping new sanctions on Russia's oil industry, the harshest since he returned to the White House, signaling a tougher stance on Moscow amid the ongoing war in Ukraine. Russia's foreign ministry has called the new U.S. sanctions counterproductive, and long-term Putin ally Dmitry Medvedev says Trump has now fully embarked on the warpath against Russia.
A rare moment of reversal from the White House and a clear message to the Kremlin. Donald Trump has scrapped his much-anticipated meeting with Vladimir Putin in Budapest, calling it not the right time. Hours later, he unleashed a new round of sanctions, the most severe of his presidency, aimed squarely at Russia's energy lifeline.
We canceled the meeting with President Putin. It didn't feel right to me. It didn't feel like we were going to get to the place we have to get, so I canceled it, but we'll do it in the future.
Trump says the measures target Russia's two largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, a move designed to cut deep into Moscow's wartime revenue.
Look, these are tremendous sanctions. These are very big. Those are against their two big oil companies, and we hope that they won't be on for long. We hope that the war will be settled.
The new restrictions freeze assets and ban transactions with Rosneft and Lukoil, punishing not only Russian exporters, but also buyers in India and China.
Currently, putting these companies and their subsidiaries on SDN lists is prohibitive because, as the Treasury outline flags, there are possible consequences, secondary sanctions for the buyers of Russian oil. In this case, we're talking primarily about India and China.
But experts say the move, while serious, is unlikely on its own to change Putin's calculus unless it's followed by consistent enforcement and military pressure.
Even with shrinking oil revenues, which currently actually constitute about, like energy revenues total, constitute about 30% of Russia's budget income, so that's significant. Nonetheless, that alone is unlikely to radically alter Putin's calculus. What sanctions can achieve successfully is limiting the resources available at in Putin's hands to continue this war.
The new sanctions bring Washington closer in line with Britain and the EU, while analysts say the real test lies in Asia, whether buyers like India and China comply or face US penalties. For the Kremlin, the move strikes at one of its last wartime lifelines, and experts say only sustained economic and military pressure can turn it from a tactical warning into a genuine push for peace.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump met with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in Washington, where Ukraine was on top of the agenda. Our Ubi Shabander has more from the U.S. Capitol.
The Secretary General of the NATO Military Alliance, Mark Rutte, is in Washington holding an emergency summit with President Trump. Rutte told reporters that he has full confidence in the president's leadership as part of an effort to bring an end to the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Rutte discussed the billions of dollars worth of U.S. weapons that the U.S. is now selling to NATO military allies are then being transferred to Ukraine. There is still an ongoing impasse in the negotiations where President Trump is hoping to broker a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. And we have seen reports that the United States has now lifted restrictions on how long-range cruise missiles being provided by the West to Ukraine could be used to strike deep into Russian territory. In particular, the Shadow cruise missile that is produced by the United Kingdom and by the French using American targeting data is used by Ukraine to target strategic sites, including oil refineries in the Russian mainland. The new U.S. policy, according to reports coming out of Washington, will make it much easier for the Ukrainians to receive American approval to use these long-range weapons, which have a range of around 250 kilometers to strike into the Russian mainland. We have seen Ukrainian military using long-range drones to strike strategic oil and refinery facilities throughout Russia. And the U.S. Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, also announced that new sweeping American sanctions will be implemented on Gazprom and Lukoil, two of Russia's largest energy companies, including sanctions that will target any U.S. subsidiaries. The Treasury Secretary said that this is part of an effort to try to force the Russians back into the negotiating table, and he specifically cited Russia's refusal to adhere to President Trump's peace talks and to President Trump's demands that both Russia and Ukraine stop at the current battle lines on the existing front lines. Treasury Secretary Bessent said that further sanctions and further actions by the United States against Russia's energy infrastructure could take place if Moscow does not agree to a ceasefire. I'm Ube Shibander, A News, Washington.
Now, European Union leaders are meeting in Brussels to discuss the war in Ukraine, as President Volodymyr Zelensky says a ceasefire is still possible. While the Ukrainian president insists that more pressure will be needed on Moscow to make a ceasefire happen. Meanwhile, EU countries on Thursday formally adopted the 19th package of sanctions against Russia, including a ban on Russian liquefied natural gas imports. Leaders backed a proposal to use frozen Russian assets to provide a 140 billion euros reparation loan to Ukraine, and also praised the sanctions of White House against Russia's oil industry.
Ceasefire is possible, of course, and I think all of us need ceasefire. But we need more pressure on Russia for ceasefire. Pressure, it means sanctions packages, long range, air defense, and of course financial support, about what we will speak together today. This is the main thing, that together. Thank you for this unity, thank you for this support.
Today in the morning we approved already the 19th package of sanctions, targeting shadow fleet, banking and energy sector of Russia. And today in this European Council we will take the political decision to ensure the financial needs of Ukraine for 2026 and 2027.
Israel's parliament has taken its most controversial step in years, approving a preliminary bill to apply Israeli sovereignty to parts of the occupied West Bank, a move critics say could derail ongoing peace efforts in the region. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the Israeli Knesset's move towards the annexation of West Bank would threaten President Donald Trump's plan to end the conflict in Gaza.
We think it's important for the first 7 to 10 days over the next week that we had senior level administration officials on the ground working to make sure this was all coming together. This was a historic peace deal that President Trump delivered on, and now we have to make sure that it continues and that we continue to build upon it. Yeah, that's a vote in the Knesset, but obviously I think the President's made clear that that's not something we'd be supportive of right now, and we think there's potential even threatening to the peace deal. So they're a democracy, they're going to have their votes, people are going to take these positions, but at this time it's something that we think it might be counterproductive.
Egypt and the European Union held their first summit in Brussels, signing a series of wide-ranging agreements aimed at deepening political, economic and security cooperation. One of the main outcomes of the talks was the signing of a memorandum of understanding between the EU and Egypt for a second €4 billion financing package. The funding provided as loans is intended to support Egypt's ongoing reform program. The leaders also emphasized their shared ambition to work together on global and regional issues and expressed a commitment to cooperate on facilitating the delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza.
We are preparing to launch a Palestine donor group. It will bring together international partners to jointly promote reforms and support to the Palestinian Authority, so that the Palestinian Authority is modernized, strengthened, and can deliver for the Palestinian people. Second, we are strengthening Egypt's economic stability. We are providing Egypt with €5 billion in macro-financial assistance. It was signed today. And we continue our support to social and economic reforms. The third pillar is we are boosting together investment and trade.
U.S. military forces carried out an operation against a suspected drug smuggling vessel in the waters of South America. The strike marks the first known U.S. military action in the Pacific under the Trump administration's new anti-drug campaign. Similar operations in the Caribbean have already seen 7 strikes, raising tensions with Venezuela and Colombia. U.S. officials say several suspected smugglers were on board the vessel when it was hit in international waters. The United States maintains a strong military presence in the Caribbean, including missile destroyers, F-35 jets, a nuclear submarine, and about 6,500 troops. The U.S. Department of War confirmed that, under President Donald Trump's orders, a vessel linked to a terrorist organization involved in drug trafficking was destroyed. 2 people on board, described as narco-terrorists, were killed. A supporter of Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić was shot and injured outside Parliament in the capital Belgrade on Wednesday. Vučić called the attack an act of terrorism, blaming it on his political opponents. The shooting happened in a tent set up by Vučić supporters to counter anti-government protesters. Police say a 70-year-old man entered the area, carrying a can of gasoline, allegedly intending to set the tent on fire. Video footage shows the moment the victim looked inside one of the tents before the suspect opened fire, hitting him and leaving him injured. The victim was rushed to a nearby hospital, where he received treatment. The Serbian leader urged supporters to refrain from retaliation. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has been the target of death threats in prison, the Paris prosecutor's office says. A video circulating on social media, apparently filmed by an inmate, shows him issuing threats following Sarkozy's arrival at the facility. 3 inmates were questioned as part of the investigation, and 2 mobile phones were seized during a search of the prison. The former president has been assigned 2 armed police officers for protection during his incarceration, a measure that has sparked complaints from prison guard unions. Welcome back to A News, and let's go to the Middle East now. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as Washington pushes ahead with the next stage of its Gaza peace plan, one centered on disarming Hamas and deploying an international security force. Meanwhile, the Israeli parliament has taken a highly controversial step, advancing a preliminary bill to extend Israeli sovereignty over parts of the occupied West Bank. Critics warn that such a move could undermine fragile peace efforts and complicate President Donald Trump's broader peace plan for Gaza. Adding to the tension, the International Court of Justice has issued a legal opinion stating that Israel, as an occupying power, must cooperate with the United Nations to ensure humanitarian aid reaches Gaza. The ICJ rejected Israel's claims that the UN's refugee agency UNRWA is biased or linked to Hamas. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations called the opinion shameful, while humanitarian groups said it was long overdue. To help us break these developments down, we are joined from Tel Aviv by Tom Grass, political analyst and longtime observer of Israel and regional politics. Tom, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Tom, let's begin with Vice President J.D. Vance's visit. What was the main message Washington wanted to send with this meeting in Jerusalem?
Well, as you know, President Trump was here in Israel a few days earlier, and then in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and he was hailed as a great peacemaker for bringing a ceasefire to the Israel-Hamas war, and he doesn't want to keep his eye off the ball, so he sent Vance to basically shore up the ceasefire and make sure the next steps are carried out. And also Secretary of State Rubio is also arriving today. I mean, one of the reasons is that Hamas has already repeatedly broken the ceasefire. They have not disarmed as they're meant to. They have not released all the dead Israeli hostages they murdered as they were meant to. And they have also launched an attack, killing 2 Israeli soldiers, wounding others, and then the next day more. So there's pressure inside Israel for the government to actually say if Hamas are breaking the ceasefire, Israel should too. And I think Vance came here to let it be known, be patient, things take time, give it a chance, step by step. And the Israeli government's going along with that. At the same time, it's like good cop, bad cop, because while Vance says slowly, Trump back in Washington is sending out posts on his Truth Social telling Hamas that if they don't disarm, according to the agreement, they will be obliterated.
J.D. Vance said Israel is not a vassal state. How is that statement being interpreted within Israel, especially amid growing domestic criticism of Netanyahu?
Well, I mean, Israel is not a vassal state. Obviously, Israel needs to have close alliances, and there is none closer than the alliance with the United States. And obviously, Israel welcomes American involvement and listens to America. But Israel and America have an alliance based on shared values, democracy, and so on. And Israel is no more a vassal state than, Britain or France is. Any NATO member also has to take into account Washington's views and desires and wishes. But, unless every ally of America is going to be called a vassal state, then Israel also should not be called a vassal state. And in fact, Israel prides itself on not ever asking for American troops on the ground, that Israeli troops will defend themselves, will defend Israel themselves.
Mr. Grass, the proposed Israeli bill to apply sovereignty over parts of the West Bank has caused major controversy. What is driving this political move now?
Well, it's not actually. It's a lot of fuss about nothing. It was the right wing and opposition parties trying to embarrass Prime Minister Netanyahu while Vice President Vance was here. They tried to rush through a preliminary bill to annex parts of the West Bank against the government's will. The government did not support this agenda, and it was like an unholy alliance between far-right parties and some opposition parties, like one led by the kind of renegade Israeli politician Avigdor Lieberman. And there will be elections coming up next year.
Why are they doing this? Why are they doing this?
The objectives are to embarrass the government. Exactly this, to get it spoken about as headlines on international media to embarrass the government. It has no practical effect, but they got what they want. They want to make life uncomfortable for their own prime minister because they are opposition politicians, and they are sort of, it's like throwing things into the air. It's a little bit like Britain and France suddenly declaring a Palestinian state. They don't actually think a Palestinian state is going to come about because they've declared one, but they are assuaging domestic politics for their own reasons to suddenly declare one now. So likewise, various politicians in Israel who are opposed to the Israeli government are doing this for their own political reasons. But in effect, it's actually meaningless. I would add that if and when there ever is a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, they've already agreed to what are called land swaps and border adjustments. Both sides, both the Palestinian Authority and Israel, have agreed in principle to that. So parts of the West Bank are likely to become part of Israel, just like parts of Israel may become part of a future Palestinian state. The border that was drawn up in peace agreements that never came to fruition envisage land swaps really along demographic lines. So there are Arab Israeli cities in Israel that may become become part of Palestine and Jewish cities in the West Bank that may become part of Israel. But that was a consensual move. That's not what's going on here with a kind of bill about annexation.
Mr. Grass, the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned this step could threaten Trump's Gaza peace framework. How might this affect U.S.-Israel relations?
I don't think they'll affect them at all, because this is not an Israeli government proposal, as I just said. These are some opposition parties who are just making trouble. Look, it's not exactly the same, but it's a bit like politicians in Washington having a government shutdown just to embarrass the president. It's political grandstanding. It's not very serious.
So the International Court of Justice's opinion calls on Israel to cooperate with the United Nations in delivering aid to Gaza. How is the Israeli government responding to this?
Well, Israel is delivering aid to Gaza. The issue is whether UNRWA, the UN agency, which Israel says is almost hand in hand with Hamas, and Israel says, and in fact it's been proven now, that some UNRWA staff members actually participated in the murders in Israel of October 7th. Others are Hamas
but
ICJ
denies, rejects Israel's claims about UNRWA being biased.
Israel says this is nonsense. Yeah, the International Court can say what it wants. I mean, it's there. It's not a secret, okay? Some UNRWA staff members on Facebook have openly said they're Hamas members, and indeed the Hamas website praises some UNRWA, they praise them for their, what they call resistance acts on behalf of Hamas. So the ICJ can say what they want, just like the UN can say what it wants. It doesn't make it true.
So given the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, do you think this ICJ opinion could have any practical impact on aid delivery, or will it remain largely symbolic?
No. The only reason there will be a crisis in Gaza is twofold. One, because Hamas are not distributing the food and other items that are already there, because Hamas, for their own reasons, want to control aid and withhold from certain groups that are anti-Hamas, Palestinian groups. It's not a question of quantity of aid, it's a question of distribution of aid. Secondly is the question of building materials. So there is actually quite plenty of food and medicine now, but there is not rebuilding materials. And under the Trump plan, that can't go in until Hamas disarm, because what they don't want to do is supply materials that Hamas will use for building more tunnels and rockets and so on. So until Hamas disarm, there won't be any serious quantity of rebuilding materials. That is what is being held up. Again, the news media keep on talking about a lack of aid. There is no serious lack of aid in Gaza. That's not a problem. And again, just because the media keep on repeating it, doesn't actually make it accurate.
Mr. Grass, what kind of domestic debate is unfolding inside Israel regarding UN agencies and their role in Gaza?
Well, again, what is UNRWA? We have to remember, UNRWA is a special UN agency set up for Palestinian refugees. All other refugees in the world are part of the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. And UNRWA has a unique definition that says you are still a refugee even if you're literally 5 generations later. In other words, somebody whose great-great-grandfather was a refugee in 1948 is now considered a refugee according to UNRWA. And that would include, for example, Queen Rania of Jordan is officially classed by UNRWA as a refugee. And what Israel says is that UNRWA are part of the problem. If you defined as anyone who was a 5th-generation refugee in the world, i.e. one of your great-great-great-grandparents had to move because of war, then I think about half the world's population will be defined as refugees. And Israel says, You can't both recognize a Palestinian state, i.e. Western countries recognizing it, and say Palestinians in the Palestinian state are still recognized as refugees. And they say UNRWA, for various reasons, are an impediment to moving forward on the peace process. And I think the Trump organization and some other Western governments agree with Israel. This is nonsense. That's not to say there shouldn't be help, financial and other humanitarian help, but forever to perpetuate refugee status. So it's something you inherit from your parents, even if you now live in a normal house and have a car and whatever. It's simply
Mr. Grass,
keeping the conflict going.
What will be the UN's role in Gaza?
Well, there are different UN agencies. There may be a role for UNICEF, and there are all kinds of UN agencies. It's specifically UNRWA, which is the main agency, which Israel says is working hand in hand with Hamas. Look, I'll give you an example. Since the ceasefire, Hamas have executed at least 100 Palestinians that they don't like. They say they're collaborators with Israel, but actually they're not. They're picking on people they accuse of being homosexuals, people they just don't like, people from rival clans. They're also torturing people have been kneecapped. None of this is in doubt. Hamas themselves have put out videos on their own Telegram channel as a warning to other Palestinian groups that Hamas are in control. Don't challenge us. Now, how does the UN play into this? You have UN officials actually welcoming what they call Hamas's resumption of control when being asked, do you condemn Hamas's extrajudicial murder or shootings of people in the street? These are blindfolded Palestinians put on their knees, banned with metal bars, having big rocks dropped on them to break bones, and then sometimes shot. So these are the kind of UN staff we have on the ground in Gaza. And what's kind of ironic and ridiculous is all the Palestinians I know and speak to agree 100% with what I'm saying. They also don't like UNRWA because UNRWA is backing up Hamas. The only people who like UNRWA in Gaza are people who want to perpetuate Hamas's rule. And under the Trump plan, which is signed onto by many other countries, many Arab countries, Turkey, Indonesia, as well as Arab countries, Hamas have to give up power, or at least they have to give up arms and no longer govern Gaza. Under the Trump plan, there will be a new authority that will not be a jihadi authority governing Gaza. And
thank you very much for sharing your insights and analysis with us today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Welcome back to A News Now. Let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. President of Turkey Recep Tayyip Erdogan concluded his three-day Gulf tour with a visit to Oman, meeting Sultan Haytham bin Tariq and presenting him with a Turkish electric car TOG. The tour also included visits to Kuwait and Qatar, where several bilateral agreements were signed to strengthen political, economic and defense cooperation.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan concluded his three-day Gulf tour on Wednesday with a meeting with Sultan Haytham bin Tariq in Muscat, the capital of Oman. Following a formal welcoming ceremony at Al Alam Palace, the two leaders held a closed-door meeting. After the discussions, President Erdogan presented Sultan Haytham with Turkey's domestically produced electric car, TOG. The leaders inspected the vehicle in the palace courtyard, with Industry and Technology Minister Mehmet Fatih Kacır briefing the Sultan on the car's design and technological features. Historically, relations between Turkey and Oman date back to the 11th century and developed further during the Ottoman era from the 14th century to the early 20th century, including military cooperation to secure trade routes. During the Gulf tour, Erdogan also visited Kuwait and Qatar. In Kuwait, 4 bilateral agreements were signed covering maritime transport, mutual recognition of certificates, energy cooperation and direct investment promotion. In Qatar, Erdogan met with Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, where a series of bilateral agreements were signed. The two countries maintain close political, economic and defense cooperation. The Gulf tour aimed to strengthen Turkey's relations with Gulf states across political, economic and defense sectors.
Saudi Arabia is expanding tourism investment at its historic Al Ula site. The kingdom plans to launch projects to attract private investors and turn the UNESCO World Heritage Site into a global tourism destination.
Saudi Arabia's ancient Al Ula is opening its doors wider, this time to private investors. The kingdom plans to launch $1.6 billion projects to turn one of its most treasured heritage sites into a global tourism magnet. At the heart of Saudi Arabia's northwestern desert, Al Ula, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is preparing for its next transformation.
We're embarking upon a big initiative to secure private sector investment, and we have about $6 billion worth of investment opportunities with about 21 projects that will be floating to the market sometime at the end of the year, early next year. Our primary markets are this region, the Gulf region, with 70% of our visitors really coming from Saudi, UAE, Qatar, etc. Then 30% are international, and the international breakdown is about 5% from the United States, about 5% from the UK, about 5% from China and from India, and then the rest from Italy, Germany, and France. So those are our top 10 markets.
Last year, Al Ula drew around 300,000 visitors, a number expected to more than triple to 1 million by 2030. But development will be carefully balanced. About 60% of the vast site remains a protected national park. The site's development will roll out in 3 phases and expected to finish by 2030.
We just finished phase 1, and we're entering into phase 2 now, and then we even have a phase 3. So we'll have lots of opportunities for investment, lots of opportunities for development as well.
Experts say that the transformation of Al Ula reflects Saudi Arabia's broader shift from an oil-based economy to one investing in heritage, creativity, and sustainable tourism.
Uzbekistan is stepping up efforts to position itself as a regional digital hub through major infrastructure projects. A new partnership with Saudi Arabia's Data World aims to expand data capacity and connect the country to a high-speed Trans-Caspian network. Our Sevil Rajapova brings the details.
Uzbekistan is advancing digital cooperation with Saudi Arabia's Data World, launching a large-scale initiative to strengthen connectivity and data infrastructure. The plan includes the construction of data centers in New Tashkent and Bukhara, with a combined capacity of more than 210 megawatts, forming part of a wider effort to enhance the country's digital resilience. Data World began building its first 10-megawatt data center in Uzbekistan in May 2024 and intends to invest up to $5 billion in local projects by 2030. The new facilities will support cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and government digitalization programs. The initiative is also linked to a trilateral digital corridor between Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Azerbaijan, connecting Central Asia with the South Caucasus and Europe. In August 2025, Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan announced the construction of a 380-kilometer fiber optic line under the Caspian Sea, running from Aktau to Sumgait, which will provide Uzbekistan with access to faster and more secure data route. Officials say the project will help turn Uzbekistan's landlocked position into land connectedness, making it a key bridge for digital trade between East and West, and supporting its strategy to become a regional digital hub. It is Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
India has upgraded its presence in Afghanistan, reopening its embassy in Kabul at full capacity. The decision marks a significant shift in New Delhi's approach toward the Taliban-led authorities. Our Tamim Bahis has more in Kabul.
India's Ministry of External Affairs announced today that its technical mission in Kabul has now been elevated to a full embassy, a move that takes effect immediately. The ministry says this underscores what it calls India's firm commitment to strengthening bilateral engagement with Afghanistan's de facto authorities. During the recent visit of Afghan Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi to New Delhi, both sides agreed to reopen the embassy in full. India's External Affairs Minister Subrahmanyam Jaishankar confirmed the decision, saying New Delhi aims to deepen cooperation, particularly in development projects, humanitarian support, and capacity building initiatives. Since the Taliban's return to power in 2021, India had maintained only a limited technical mission in Kabul, mainly to oversee aid and infrastructure projects. This upgrade now signals a notable policy shift. The move also comes at a delicate regional moment. For over a week, tensions are high between Afghanistan and Pakistan, with border clashes leaving several dead on both sides. A ceasefire was reached in Doha, mediated by Qatar and Turkey, but the situation remains fragile. Further talks are expected in Istanbul later this weekend. Pakistan, which remains highly sensitive about India's involvement in Afghanistan, is watching closely. Analysts say New Delhi's latest move could reshape and possibly complicate the regional balance of power. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
And Georgia's capital, Tbilisi, has become the focal point of the global financial community today, as the first ever Tbilisi Financial Summit officially opened. The event marks a significant milestone in the country's growing ambition to position itself as a financial technology hub, linking Europe and Asia. Nini Nikolaishvili is at the venue with more.
The Tbilisi Financial Summit, organized jointly by the National Bank of Georgia, the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development, and Singapore's Global Finance and Technology Network, is being held as part of the Tbilisi Silk Road Forum. The summit brings together senior officials, investors, and fintech leaders from across the globe to discuss the future of financial technologies, regional innovation, and digital finance. In his opening address, Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze highlighted Georgia's strategic role as a bridge between East and West, emphasizing that the country's stable economy, modern infrastructure, and favorable investment climate provide a strong foundation for it to become a regional hub for trade and finance. He noted that the summit will strengthen regional cooperation and attract investment across the so-called Middle Corridor, a key route connecting Europe and Asia. Natia Turnava, president of the National Bank of Georgia, underscored the nation's robust economic performance, citing near double-digit growth and low inflation, achievements that she said set Georgia apart even from more developed economies. Turnava also outlined ongoing reforms, including the licensing of digital banks, regulation of virtual asset providers, and the launch of fintech regulatory sandbox, designed to foster innovation and attract global players. The event signals Georgia's broader push to diversify its economy and strengthen its position along global trade and financial routes. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
International travelers are continuing their tour across Karabakh region of Azerbaijan, today visiting Shusha and Fizuli to see the region's cultural revival and large-scale reconstruction firsthand. Our Gulshin Kojalieva has more.
After visiting Aghdam, Khankendi and Lachin on the first day, the international travelers are now continuing their two-day journey across Karabakh with stops in Shusha and Fizuli. In Shusha, often called the cultural heart of Karabakh, the group is exploring restored landmarks and hearing about the city's revival as a hub of history and heritage. Later in Fizuli, attention turns to rapid reconstruction, from new housing and infrastructure projects to areas that were once heavily mined and are now being cleared for safe resettlement. Organized by the Extreme Travelers International Congress, the visit offers a first-hand look at how Karabakh is transforming, balancing remembrance of its past with the work of renewal taking shape on the ground. It's Gulcin Khojalieva with Natik Mammadov for A News.
The Mobile Museum of the Battles of Çanakkale has arrived in Baku, bringing with it a powerful glimpse into the 1915 Dardanelles campaign during World War I. Designed to bring history to life, the museum travels across Turkey and beyond and will now be open for 3 days in the Azerbaijani capital. Among the items on display are personal belongings of soldiers, wartime equipment and original Dardanelles defense plan. The museum's stop in Baku reflects the deep historical and cultural bonds between Turkey and Azerbaijan. Since its launch, the mobile museum has visited dozens of cities across Turkey and several countries abroad, attracting hundreds of thousands of visitors eager to experience history in motion. You're up to date with world news for an hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News for more.